Hey everyone, and welcome to Tony for Mr. Worldwide. Tony for you. Across the globe there are countless deities, demons, and spiritual beings, but the ones we mainly focus on are from English-speaking areas. Aside from the odd yokai, many people have no idea what other places' regional practices are. Well, let's change that, and dive a little deeper into the other parts of the world. Today, we'll be discussing demons from across the globe that all appear in our favorite game series, Shin Megami Tensei and Persona. So let's strap into a deep dive from east to west and learn about the demons from across the globe. But before we get into it, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Shainling's Shady Commodities. I don't take very many sponsors. I only take ones I think my community will like. So when I was approached by a company called Shainling's Shady Commodities, I had to check it out. And when I did, I was blown away by what they had on offer. They even sent me a little box to open for you. So let's take a look. Inside of this little treasure was a lot of cool stuff. Junpei Iori keychain, SMT5 keychain, a bunch of stickers for some really cool demons. Excuse the terrible lighting. They asked who my favorite Persona 3 character was, which I obviously said was Yukari Takeba, the best girl in the game, and I got a really amazing acrylic stand of her. Believe it or not, I even got Persona 3 Reload underwear, which I'm wearing right now as you're hearing this. But the last thing they sent me, and by far the most impressive, is this enormous acrylic stand of Persona 3 Reload's most iconic characters, Makoto and Aegis. If you'd like to get some of this yourself, click the link in the pinned comment or go to shainlinks.com. They even have free shipping codes. It's not just SMT and Persona though, so browse around the website and find something you like. Thanks again Shainlings for supporting the channel. The most recognizable and possibly the most terrifying god of the region is Moloch. Moloch, whose name means ruler, is the bull-headed Caanite god of human sacrifice, and more specifically, child sacrifice. Of all the Caanite gods spoken of in the Bible and old contemporary literature, Moloch is perhaps the most brutal, bloody, and horrific. Sometimes he is described as a fallen angel, while other times he is simply a false god whose influence has irreparably poisoned the local population. His earliest depictions can be traced back to the book of Leviticus in the Bible, with other mentions within Kings and Jeremiah, here portrayed as a false god worshipped by the blasphemous Canaanites. Within the book, it tells of the Israelites venturing from their lands and visiting the other civilizations of the region. When they reached Canaan, they were met with a horror they could hardly describe. There existed a massive statue in the center of the city. The visage was that of half man and half jackal. His chest holds within a blazing fire where the people gathered. First, the people gave sacrifices of grain and animals, but the god's hunger was not sated. Soon, the people brought out their children to feed the idol. Plunged into the massive kiln, the children's screams quickly abated as the smoke passed through the great sculpture's nostrils. The sacrifice was met with immense fanfare, with music, chanting, and the prayers of even the parents resounding out in a great cacophony of terror. There are plenty of passages in the Old Testament that confuse many people. Commandments like not marking your skin and not marrying one who is outside of your religion, alongside more extreme ones like not sacrificing your children. Well, the deeper you dive into the history of Israel at the time, it becomes obvious that almost every neighbor God's chosen people had were home to some of the most horrific practices known to mankind. In fact, the term Holocaust originated from the Israelites' witnessing of human sacrifice all those years ago. Historically, the term meant a sacrifice in which the offering was burned completely on an altar. Many of the odd rules Israelites had to follow weren't exactly because those practices were inherently evil, but simply that they were commonplace in the lands of great evil. Is having a tattoo evil? Well, no, but the people of Canaan really like tattoos, so better just to steer clear of anything that they do. It also makes sense why they wouldn't exactly want their people getting married to a group that was completely comfortable with burning their own children alive. Perhaps the most extreme example of disavowal in the Bible comes from Leviticus, using the word Moloch and human sacrifice interchangeably. Moreover, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth of his seed unto Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I also will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people. Because he hath given of his seed unto Molech, to defile my sanctuary, and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do at all hide their eyes from that man, when he giveth of his seed unto Molech, and put him not to death, then I will set my face against that man, and against his family, and I will cut him off, and all that go astray after him, to go astray after Molech, from among their people. Pretty cut and dry. If anyone even thinks of sacrificing a child, they will be punished in this life and the next. Despite how definite God's words are in shunning Moloch, he plays a large part in the fall of King Solomon, the wisest king in history. Solomon was the famous son of King David, the one who slew Goliath, and built the first temple period with wisdom bestowed upon him by God himself. After many years of rule, Solomon began showing signs of a coming downfall. He was enticed by the women of neighboring lands and introduced polytheistic worship into his kingdom. God explicitly warned Solomon not to mingle with the women of these blasphemous lands, but the king would not listen. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. After his death, the subsequent downfall of Solomon's kingdom was devastating, as no other king was recognized by the people, and never again would the people of Israel see prosperity as they once did. Outside of biblical text, perhaps no other work does the fearsome Moloch better than John Milton's Paradise Lost, in which it states, "First, Moloch, horrid king besmeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears. Though for the noise of drums and timbrels loud their children cries unheard, that passed through fire to his grim idol. Him the Ammonite worship in Rabbah and her watery plain, in Argob and in Basin, to the stream of utmost Arnon. Nor content with such audacious neighborhood, the wisest heart of Solomon he led by fraud to build his temple right against the temple of God." Sometimes I think we should count our blessing that human sacrifice was so shunned in the past. Things could have really turned out worse for us. Next is Ashura, the resident goddess of fertility. Ashura, whose name means she who enriches, is quite possibly the most important goddess of all time, since she may or may not have been the wife of Yahweh himself. Yes, that does sound crazy, since, as previously mentioned, God took polytheism as a serious affront against him, and the first of the 10 Commandments states, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." But first, let's go over the goddess herself before exploring her alleged pairing with the Lord. Thanks to stone tablets written in the ancient Semitic language Ugaritic, the theology of the region can be explored. Within these texts, Ashura is believed to bear the names Athirat, Alat, and Ashirat, so I'll be exploring them with that in mind. Ashura is considered to be the consort of El, the Semitic creator god. Many believe the god Baal to be the main god of the Canaanite pantheon, but before his popularity rose, there was the father and mother of the gods, El and Ashura. The matriarchal goddess Ashura was closely tied to the sea and holy places, as well as encompassing all traits maternal. Her name even sometimes used interchangeably with the term a holy place. She was described as the nurse of the gods and their intermediary to sort out disputes and seek compromise. She really was like a mother to them, sorting out their petty arguments. Unfortunately, the goddess waned in popularity over the many years, along with her husband El, often being conflated with Anat and Astarte, who were other female gods of the time, but the Bible distinguishes all these figures as being distinctly different entities. Ashura was commonly depicted as a simple wooden pole, often accompanied by ibexes or other grazing animals, but also sometimes depicted as simply an inverted triangle, with many scholars believing that the shape was a stand-in for the female genitalia. She was the fertility goddess after all. With that out of the way, I know what you're thinking. This Ashura lady doesn't sound so bad. How exactly is she a horrific goddess? Well, as it turns out, the culture that was totally okay with throwing children into pits of fire didn't exactly have the most holy way of worshipping the mother goddess. Somewhat obviously, Ashura had her fair share of ritualistic sacrifice as well, and many historians and theologians also believe that the women tasked with being priestesses of Ashura had very sensual duties. It was believed that acts to appease the goddess involved illicit sex and ritual prostitution. It can also be assumed that many women of the time were born and raised to be temple prostitutes. These acts of depravity oftentimes being done under what was known as an Ashura pole. These sacred trees were meant to depict the goddess and were so ubiquitous at the time that they were sometimes simply called Asuras themselves. Now, finally, to get back to the goddess's pairing with Yahweh, the god of the Israelites. Archaeological digs within the ancient city of Arad, located in the Kingdom of Judah dating back to the 9th century to 6th century BCE, found some odd things. Within an ancient temple, they found there were 2 standing stones, one large and one small, with 2 incense burners alongside them. These standing stones often conveyed the presence of a deity within the temple, but the people at the time ought to have only worshipped one, so why were there 2? Turns out there are even more odd archaeological finds throughout the region that may convey a possible consort to Yahweh. In the Sinai region, there existed a jar with a Hebrew blessing written on it, stating Yahweh of Samaria and his Ashura. Another inscription was found on a tablet within the region stating, Blessed by Uriah, by Yahweh, for from his enemies, by Yahweh's Ashura, he has saved him. These finds confused many religious scholars, not only with the knowledge that blessings were written as if to say Yahweh had a consort with which he commanded the Israelites, but also the odd manner in which it was written. So, does this confirm that God originally had a wife that was revised out of history? Well, no, not really. Most likely, since the ancient Israelite religion had many similarities to the ancient Canaanite religion, some Israelites may have confused Ashura as the consort of their god rather than El of the Canaanites. El, whose name means simply God or Lord, is also a name used for the Israelite God in the Old Testament, along with Elohim, Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh, and many more. This would lead many to believe the god El was also commonly mistaken for the Israelite god Yahweh, therefore making the pairing between him and Ashura very natural, as that was literally the belief of the Canaanites at the time. Another interpretation is that the grammar is intentionally odd. Yahweh and his Ashura isn't exactly how you would write about the wife of your god, but rather an inanimate object. As we said before, sometimes the word Ashura was used to describe simply an object, in this case a wooden pole meant to invoke the goddess, and was also used as a synonym for a holy place, though even these explanations leave many people confused. The most simple explanation is that the people of Israel at the time did in fact embrace the polytheistic nature of other religions into their kingdom, backed up with the biblical text with the fall of King Solomon being attributed to such practices. Ashura was surely one of the most popular of these goddesses, as she was second to El in Canaan. Her rituals of sex must have been quite popular, and feminine figures were found all over the dwellings of Israel at the time. The Bible, on many occasions, states the Israelites falling to idol worship plenty of times, and the archaeological finds back this up perfectly. It's impossible to know whether Ashura was the wife of Yahweh, just another fertility goddess, or even the horrible deity of prostitution and adultery. Regardless, this is a deity with a lot more to her than Moloch, but maybe that just makes her all the more insidious. When talking about the unique characters of Islam, what better place to start than the jinn? While the first thing that pops into your head when you think of a jinn or genie is a magical, brightly colored ghost that grants wishes, the reality of this race has a lot more to it. Jinn live structured lives, work, have families, and even worship God like humans. Tracing back to the beginnings of Islam, and even further with the local folklore of the Arabian Peninsula, the jinn have a rich history. The word jinn is plural for genie, which is believed to come from the root jinana, meaning to hide or conceal, which makes sense as the jinn are not able to be seen by normal humans. Sadly, not much is known about the jinn's origins in pre-Islamic Arabic folklore, but many speculate these were the contemporary gods of the time, as many early religions were polytheistic. Interestingly, many people also believe the jinn were meant to depict evil spirits that wander the desert. And to bolster this theory, there were many similar records of jinn-like creatures from close-by areas like ancient Mesopotamia. Specifically in Palmyra, which is now Syria, these beings were called jinni, as written in ancient Aramaic. So creatures like this were a part of Arabic culture and the Middle East as a whole for potentially many thousands of years. As mentioned in Islam, this race is one of the 3 sentient beings created by God: the angels that were made of light, the humans that were made of clay, and the jinn that were made of smokeless fire. The jinn had a close connection to the desert and made their homes in dark places, usually ruins, and could transform into many different animals. While they may be invisible to us, jinn can make contact with, influence, and even possess human beings. Being possessed by one of these entities usually drove one insane, with the Arabic word for madman being majnun, meaning possessed by a genie. Despite this frightening ability, as I said before, jinn are neither wholly good or wholly evil. They are a sentient race created by God and functioned in much the same way as humans. With their own friends and families, kings and queens, and art and culture, they were revered as well as feared by the locals. In fact, much art from the people at the time was cited to have been inspired by a jinn, possibly even possessed to make it. They were often seen as a race in between the realms of earth and spirit, and could be a great help or hindrance to whoever they crossed paths with. They operated in much the same way as daemons in ancient Greece, with many of them being teachers of art and science and makers of awe-inspiring art and poetry. With the rise of Islam thanks to the Prophet Muhammad, the jinn were incorporated into this new religion with an entire chapter dedicated to them, with the surah simply titled Al-Jinn, meaning the jinn. In this chapter, it outlines how the jinn were compelled to follow the guidance of the Quran, saying, "Among us are those who are righteous and those who are less so. We have been of different factions. Now, we truly know we cannot frustrate Allah on earth, nor can we escape from Him into heaven. When we heard the guidance of the Quran, we readily believed in it. For whoever believes in their Lord will have no fear of being denied a reward or wronged. And among us are those who have submitted to Allah and those who are deviant. So as for those who submitted, it is they who have attained right guidance, and as for the deviant, they will be fuel for hell." Even with the guidance of the Quran, the jinn still remain a complex race. There were those of the jinn race whose sole aim was to lead humanity astray from the right guidance of God. And these beings were dubbed shaitan, meaning Satan. That is not to say the jinn are devils, as the word Satan itself is more of a title than a name. The word Satan in Hebrew is often translated to the word adversary or simply one who opposes. This word shows up many times in biblical scripture and is sometimes even attributed to angels working on behalf of God. In this case, the jinn who oppose Allah and aim to taint humans are shaitan or adversaries to God. Shaitan in Islam serve much the same function as the fallen angels turned demons in Christian canon, with a great war in heaven breaking out after Lucifer convinced 1/3 of all demons to rebel against God, resulting in their swift defeat by the Most High and cast down into the depths of hell for their arrogance, with their chief Lucifer now being known as the Devil. Lucifer and these fallen angels continue to this day, influencing humans to act against the will of God and their fellow man, and must be fought back against as they have no true power. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Officially, Lucifer is trapped in hell and is a prisoner alongside all those cast into the pits of Tartarus, with many believing the true overseer of hell is the archangel Uriel. This is important to understand, since in more recent times there's been an idea of Lucifer being some commanding entity rivaling the power of God, with the ideals of freedom and individuality core to his belief. The truth is, Lucifer was always pure evil and only aimed to overthrow God to take his place, nothing driving him but envy and pride. Depictions such as Paradise Lost and even Dante's Divine Comedy, despite being fantastic works of art, are not canonical to Christian theology. For Islam, the parallel to Lucifer is a being known as Iblis. Instead of being a fallen angel, Iblis was a great jinn general who fought on behalf of God. According to Islam, angels are not really capable of free thought. Though sentient, angels have no need for things like a name or free will, as their sole purpose is to enact the will of God. Very few angels are named in the Quran, aside from the archangels, here called Jibra'il, Mikail, Israfil, and Azra'il. The idea of naming angels is wholly unnecessary and only done for the needs of humans, since they will only ever act as God wills. Jinn, on the other hand, do have free will, and Iblis was one of the first, created even before the times of Adam. He was a devout follower of God for thousands of years, and in his pious worship, he eventually ascended to the seventh heaven among the angels. When Adam was created, God called for all the angels to bow before him, to which they all did. Iblis, on the other hand, was a jinn created of fire, rather than a true angel. He refused the will of God and did not bow. Due to his defiance, Iblis was cast down back to earth and stripped of all he had worked towards, becoming El Shaitan. Now on earth, Iblis is the king of evil jinn, whose sole aim is to lead humans away from the teachings of God as fuel for the fires of hell. Islam, much like other Abrahamic religions, uses these evil spirits as explanations for the evils of the world, but with a little more nuance. More recently, the types of jinn are put into 5 main types: Jan, Jinn, Shaitan, Ifrit, and Marid. According to these groups, John is the general term for all jinn, and jinn is specifically used for families and tribes. Shaitan is the term for evil jinn, those jinn who call Iblis their king. Ifrit are also usually evil jinn, but with much more power in the magical arts, usually the power over the elements of fire and earth. Marids are the most powerful type of jinn and are usually evil, as their name literally translates to rebellious. These great beings are most likely the inspiration for modern interpretations of genies, as they are powerful enough to even grant wishes and hold power over all the elements of earth. In the original story of Aladdin, our hero had two magical artifacts that held jinn within them, a ring and a lamp. Many interpret the jinn of the ring to be an ifrit, and the jinn of the lamp to be a marid. These titles do not encompass all types of jinn, and certainly many jinn can fit the description of many categories. There are even jinn that don't fit any category, like the ghoul. These are spirits that mainly live in cemeteries and are said to shapeshift and even consume the flesh of humans, luring men with the fake body of a beautiful woman, only to devour the unsuspecting victim. And yes, if you're wondering, it's believed that this jinn is the origin of the word ghoul. Jinn can range from heroes, inspiring humans to seek glory and make great works, or be as horrifying as cannibal monsters, sending even the most fearless of men packing. Ultimately, jinn are a race with great power, but more importantly, free will. There are jinn that listened to the Prophet Muhammad and became Muslim, read the Bible and become Christian, read the Torah and become Jewish. They live their lives, not too unlike you and me. Though they are invisible spirits capable of great magic, there is a mutual respect as we're both children of God. So be respectful and never judge a book by its cover. In Shin Megami Tensei, the jinn are portrayed in the stereotypical genie in a bottle way, with the lower half of clouds and the top half of a brightly colored man. They are called jinn instead of genie, and their alignment is neutral, so I do believe they did their research when it came to the jinn in some way. Ifrit are also depicted in the game and are similar to the jinn. Instead of clouds, their lower half is fire, with dark skin and horns like a ram. Their alignment is also neutral, showing the nuance of the race. Shaitan appears in the series as well, and are depicted in a rather unique way. In line with the previous types of jinns, they have the lower body of a rainbow of colors flowing into a small human-like body, wearing a leather jacket and sporting a punk mohawk. I gotta say, them being depicted as the little punks of the jinn world is actually a pretty funny twist on the horrible demons they're played up to be. Iblis, sadly, is only in the Devil Children games, and is portrayed in a way I can't even begin to speculate on, looking more like a golem than any jinn and being colored seemingly randomly. I don't think they put much thought into the design, which is a shame, as Iblis deserves just as much respect as Lucifer in the games. Oh well, maybe Iblis will get the respect he deserves in a future game. Overall, Islam is quite well represented in the games. Here's hoping they add more from it and Arabic folklore as a whole. Onyankopan. His true name being Nyankopan Nyame Odomankoma, originating from the region of Ghana, he is commonly referred to as Anyame. His name literally translates to, the one who knows and sees everything. Pretty straightforward. I like that in a god. With these old religions though, nothing is really as simple as it seems. According to this god, there are actually 3 gods that make up one god. Bear with me. Each of these deities are the aforementioned hyphenated names I mentioned before, Nyankopan, Nyame, and Odomankoma, with each of them representing an aspect of divinity as the Trinity. The usage of the word Trinity to represent a supreme god may have got you thinking of Christianity, though the symbology of a trinity representing all things divine is not a new concept at all. One could say the usage of a trinity is an archetype seen across the world, from Hinduism with Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, Christianity with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and even some pagan beliefs like Wicca with the Mother, Maiden, and Old Crone. Each of these individual gods split represents concepts and ideals for different people, but ultimately are exemplified in the truth of their unique god. In the Akom region, Odomankoma is the aspect representing all things creative, with reason, reality, and the absolute. His powers are not bound by the laws of the land, and is consistently described as the creator god, even given the title of Father. That being said, father is a bit of an understatement though, since there is a saying the worshippers have, being Odomankoma Buade, meaning Odomankoma created the thing. The thing in question being, well, the entire universe along with everything that has ever and will ever exist on it. As for Anyankopan, he is the successor to Otomankoma, representing the male aspect of the Trinity and also the youngest among them. Being Nyame's son, he has large shoes to fill, but it seems he is fit for the task. Onyankopan literally means the only great Onyame. Now I know what you're thinking, how can he be the only great Onyame when there are other aspects of the god? Well, sadly there's always trouble in these old religions. An entity named Owo was created by Otomankoma, who was a being solely dedicated to death, be it the death of humans, animals, or even gods. One day, Owo would come for Otomankoma, putting a grand symbolic end to the god of creativity and life. For all that will live must also die. Onyankopan was named the successor, and he was a mighty fine one at that, being called the powerful Onyankopan, the giver of the sun, and carrying aspects of his predecessor with him, even being mistaken for the supreme creator himself. Onyankopan was always fond of humans, even living among them in his early years. Those who revered him saw the god as a bringer of motivation and mercy in times of hardship. Even when he migrated to the realm of the sky, the humans that loved him never felt he had truly left them at all. In Shin Megami Tensei, Onyankopan is portrayed as this little fella. Dressed in what looks like traditional African garments in vibrant gold patterns, he holds a scepter with a bird motif, commanding the sky, and his head garment emblazoned with an extravagant sun, representing his title as Bringer of the Sun. His body, being that of a small, dark humanoid, is most likely in reference to the old carvings found in many African tribes representing their deities with the means they had to revere them. Overall, a really unique and interesting design for a wonderful and kind deity. Next up, let's talk about a being who is a little less nice, but very closely tied to the previous god. Anansi, or Ananse, is also a god in the Akan religion, with his name translating to spider. He is a god representing wisdom and knowledge, but most of all, trickery, and is believed to possibly be Onyankopan's son. Well known within the region for his ability to defeat much larger and skilled opponents with his schemes, creativity, and wit. Anansi is the star of many tales dubbed the Spider Tales, spread across the regions of West Africa, having Anansi in the role of a protagonist and antagonist. The best way to understand Anansi is to understand one of his most famous stories, the story of how he became the keeper of all tales. Long ago, Anansi looked like a man, but with extra arms and extra legs, and could even spin webs. Despite this odd appearance, he lived with humans, accepted by them. After some time, Anansi noticed humans were miserable. They lacked anything to make their lives bright. Just then, he recalled, in the Sky Palace of Nyame, the Sky God owned all the stories of the world. Stories could make any human happy, for generations to come. Anansi spun his web to the heavens and met with the Sky God, where he was greeted directly. The lives of humans are so bleak, they need something to give them hope. I hoped you might share your stories with them, Anansi proclaimed. The Sky God laughed in Anansi's face, thinking the idea of sharing to be foolish. Anansi insisted on sharing the stories with humanity, however, which tugged at the Sky God's heartstrings enough to give Anansi a chance. A small one, but a chance. The Spider God was given 4 of the ruler's most impossible tasks. You must capture Maboro, the deadly hornet swarm, Onini, the killer python, Osibo, the stealthy leopard, and Moashia, the mischievous fairy. To the god's surprise, Anansi eagerly accepted, which left him in equal parts confused and concerned. Coming back to Earth, Anansi went to his wife, Eso, and she agreed to help him. Anansi tricked the angry swarm of hornets into taking shelter in a large gourd, making them think it was raining, after pouring water on a large leaf above his head. Next, Anansi and his wife tricked the killer python Onini by appealing to his vanity. Pretending to have an argument with his wife, Anansi said Eso didn't believe the python to actually be the longest being in the world. Quick to anger, the snake stretched out fully to prove a point. Anansi said he had curled at the end, so he had to fix it by simply tying him down. When the python agreed, Anansi had officially completed 2 of his tasks. Next was Osibo, the leopard, and possibly the most dangerous task yet. Knowing he was clearly outmatched, Anansi simply dug a hole and waited for the leopard to strike him first. The leopard prided himself on stealth, but with that came a slow approach. Right before he was about to pounce on the spider god, he fell into the large pit. Finally, the last was Moesha. whose magic was even greater than that of the spider gods. To nab her, Anansi baked a delicious dish of yams, placed it on the ground, and then placed a small doll covered in sticky sap. Not long after, the fairy appeared, asking for a bite of the delicious treat. The doll was a doll, so it didn't say anything. The fairy became enraged and slapped the doll across the face, getting her stuck in the process. With wit and more than a little trickery, all the tasks had been completed. Anansi went back to the Sky Palace in record time too. The Sky God was less than enthused about his, let's just say, unorthodox approach. But a deal is a deal. Anansi was told that humans would be forever grateful to the spider, and all tales would be called spider stories from then on in his honor. To this day, the tradition of spider stories lives on in that region. In Shin Megami Tensei, Anansi is portrayed extremely well, being a large man dressed in wrapped cloth carrying traditional African design, with fine golden jewelry on his wrists and ankles. He has 6 spider legs and, along with his regular human legs, makes a normal spider's clean 8. His eyes are seemingly that of a spider, though he never looks straight ahead, symbolic of him always hiding a certain part of his intent. His head ornament even looks like that of a gourd, in reference to one of his tasks being to trap the hornets which he held in a gourd. Such a great design for the deity we all owe so much to, as the new keeper of stories. Now let's talk about something a little closer to home. What kind of African folklore breakdown would this be if I didn't mention something relating to voodoo in some way? Loa, or sometimes spelled Lua, are spirits in Haitian and Dominican voodoo. Now I know those aren't African countries, but the religion was spread throughout the world during the African slave trade. Due to this, there are many parallels to more modern Abrahamic beliefs. The Loa are spirits known to be intermediaries between humans and the divine. Messengers, if you will. The god in this case is a being known as Bondye, the transcendent creator deity. Much like angels, each Loa has their own unique personalities and can even be closely tied to specific colors and objects. Many believe them to be not too dissimilar to the Catholic saints in that way. The Loa are divided into 2 different groups, or nanchons, Petwo and Rada. Petwo are the Loa who might be a little less friendly. They are known to be volatile and hot-tempered. Rada, on the other hand, are known to be rather kind and mild-mannered. That isn't to say that one is good and the other is evil, however, rather that they serve different purposes when venerated by the voodooist. For Petwo Loa, they may be short-tempered and quick to anger, but they are especially useful when the would-be practitioner requires something to get done quickly and efficiently. Matters pertaining to wealth especially are considered to be the domain of the Petwo. Rituals to venerate these Loa usually have a mix of rum, blood, gunpowder, and pepper. The rhythm of drums are fast and loud, with yelling, explosions, and cracking of whips being especially effective in pleasing these spiritual beings. The Rada Loa are much less intense in their ceremonies. They are usually invoked when the voodooist requires something regarding other people and manners of delicacy with grace and kindness. They are even venerated simply to maintain prosperity and good relations. The offerings are that of fruit and other pleasant-smelling aromatics, along with blood. Can't escape it, I guess. The rituals involve dancing, feasting, and music potentially lasting all night long. Voodooists even practice a ritual known as mystic marriage, which is, as you might expect, the act of marrying a Loa. This is more of a symbolic gesture, obviously, than a real marriage, but the ceremony is still very much the same. The priest has a large party, special attire, wedding cake, and even ring. Though obviously you can't consummate a marriage with a spiritual being, so a vow of celibacy is required. I don't think you want to be caught cheating on an angel. Some Loas are more important than others though, much like in Abrahamic religions. In voodoo, there is a Loa that is a direct parallel to the idea of an angel of death. These Loa, named Guide, are said to be the guides of the recently deceased, escorting them to the afterlife. One of the most famous of these Guides is a being known as Papa Guide. He is believed to have been the first man who ever died, appearing as a short, dark-skinned man with a large top hat commonly seen smoking cigars and eating apples. Despite his domain of death, he is widely seen as a benevolent spirit, and when there is a young child sick, Papa Guide is often prayed to. It's believed he will not take a life before it's ready, and so, when he is shown one so young dying an unjust death, he will step in and make it right. In Shin Megami Tensei, Loa are portrayed as large skulls with snakes coiled around them. Despite the striking appearance, I can't quite find an exact reason why they're portrayed in this way. In common depictions, they are snake-like humans or sometimes just skeletons, so mixing the two could make sense. Papa Geed is also portrayed in SMT, with a demon known just as Geed. Here, portrayed very closely to his depiction in folklore, with a dapper outfit, top hat with snake ornament, and skeletal painted dark skin. Even his body language is correctly conveyed, as in legend, he's believed to have quite a sense of humor, if a little crass, so his wide grin and forward-facing hunch is very accurate. A much more interesting backstory than you might think for a simple skull demon. These beings are in the Buddhist religion, which spans a vast amount of land and cultures. They can also be seen in many other regional practices. Throughout the continent, they may go by many names and can look very different. I'll cover as many substantial differences as I can, but there is simultaneously so much and so little known explicitly about these gods, it will be hard. Also, in talking about these gods, keep in mind I'm not fluent in the Chinese languages, Sanskrit, or even Japanese, so bear with me as I try to pronounce these names. Alright, let's get into it. First up is the Guardian of the North, Bishamonten. This fierce deity has a long lance as well as a miniature stupa in his other hand. Stupa means heap in Sanskrit, and despite its unassuming name, they are important parts of Buddhist architecture and can be quite extravagant depending on which one you go to. What's interesting is, depending on where he is worshipped and in what context he appears, the orientation of his belongings are different. In Japan, he holds the spear in his right hand and a pagoda in his left. In China, he holds the spear in his left hand and a pagoda in his right. And in places like Tibet, India, and others, he holds the spear in his left hand and a stupa in his right. He is very rarely seen with the spear in his dominant hand, or when he does appear in such a way, the spear is often covered or blunted in some way. The symbolism of him holding a miniature holy site in his hands is powerful, especially considering it was a gift from the Buddha himself. Bishamonten is also sometimes referred to as Teimonten, meaning listening to many teachings. This name is descriptive, as he is said to guard with fervor the many places where the Buddha taught in life. Despite being a fierce god of war and defender of the North, he is very rarely portrayed in such a menacing way. His presence is supposed to bring peace and understanding to the people he watches over. In China, he is known as Pishemantian, a god associated with war, and in other Buddhist parts of the world he is known as Vesravana, a god associated with wealth. In Shin Megami Tensei, he is portrayed in much the same way. He is a tall and fierce deity whose skin is dark blood red. He holds a stupa made of gold in his right hand, and in his left what looks like a small spear with no obvious point. His gold attire is most likely a reference to the god of wealth association he has in certain parts of the world. His stance is also most likely a reference to Teimonten's statue dating back to 13th century Japan made of wood on display in the Nara National Museum. His spear hidden from sight and the stupa gifted to him from the Buddha on full display. A very interesting start to the four heavenly kings. Second, we have the Guardian of the East, Jikokuten. This deity has a name literally translating to Guardian of the Nation. This is quite possibly the most outwardly menacing of the four heavenly kings, which makes sense as being the Guardian of the East, Japan's most commonly attributed direction, what with it being the land of the rising sun and all, would carry some weight and demand respect. He also carries the most weapons of war in his arsenal. In his right hand he carries a sword held on full display, no hiding behind the back anymore, and in his other hand he carries a large trident. Sometimes, however, he is said to carry a lute alongside his sword. The stringed instrument is a representation of the middle way of Buddhism. Strings, if too tightly wound, will break, but if wound too loose, no sounds would be produced. In order to bring out beauty, a middle ground between the two extremes must be walked, thus the middle way. In China, he is called Qiguo Tian, meaning king who holds a country, and instead of being a guardian of the land through force, he is considered to be the god of music. With his pipa stringed instrument, he plays notes carrying the teachings of the Buddha, which are used to convert sentient beings to the right path. Knowing this, his name's translation carries a powerful message. No blood need be spilled if the enemy can be swayed through the teachings and love of the Buddha. Even in his Japanese, more overtly dangerous design, his sword is never considered to be used to kill humans. He is said to use the blade to cut the strings of evil that puppeteer us alongside the demons. He cuts us free from the restraints of the evils of this world. In Shin Megami Tensei, he is portrayed with skin a piercing yellow, much like the rays of the sun, and the sword on prominent display akin to his statue depictions. His armor is a deep green, with dragons' heads as pauldrons, alluding to his association with the Chinese dragon protectors. His stance is also likely a reference to the Nara-era 8th century clay statue at Todaiji Temple, a dangerous yet graceful being dedicated to the protection of humans. Third, we have the Guardian of the South, Zokoten. This deity has a name meaning Lord who expands, or Lord who enlarges. Quite an interesting name, but one that is of paramount importance, at least to the people at the time. But this is less literal than you would imagine for the warring states across Asia. Often portrayed with a long spear, he represents spiritual growth over just domain expansion. On some occasions, Zokoten is displayed with a vajra over a trident or spear, which is another weapon more closely associated with the Buddhist teachings. This heavenly king is quite possibly the one portrayed most differently throughout the regions. In Japan, Zokoten is dressed in blue with a spear. In China, called Senjiang Tianwang, he is associated with the color red, similar to the sacred red bird guarding the same region and holding the vajra. And the differences aren't merely visual, with very little set in stone for this guardian's purpose. From his name's translation, we can understand that he helps those who come to him grow in knowledge of the Buddhist teachings, and in China he is said to help humans grow in compassion. The Vajra club in Buddhism is less a weapon when compared to the Hindu depictions and more of a symbolic tool representing a branch of Buddhism called the thunderbolt or diamond, translating to Vajrayana. The tool is meant to symbolize indestructibility and is often crafted with a bell on the other side. In Shin Megami Tensei, he is portrayed as a green-skinned being draped in blue, holding a spear in some games and the Vajra in others. Seems like not even the games can settle on one depiction of the deity. His design is most likely based on the wooden statue of the Heian era at Horyuju Temple in Nara. One of the most enigmatic of the four heavenly kings, but also probably the most interesting as well. The fourth and final heavenly king is the Guardian of the West, Komokuten. His name meaning wide-eyed or expansive vision. Coming off the heels of the most esoteric heavenly king, we have possibly the most understood. Komokuten is said to see through and punish evil, as well as encourage those who seek enlightenment. Contrary to his unassuming demeanor, this guardian is one of the only that is said to actually dole out punishments that can harm humans in some way. Despite this, he most likely does not carry out the punishments himself. He is most often depicted holding a scroll and brush with which to write down the deeds of mortals and share the teachings of the Buddha. Komokuten is draped in red armor with cool blue skin. The deeds of humans are noted down and contemplated on for the karmic balance of the moral soul. Better be on your best behavior for him. In China, this deity has a vastly different description though. Here called Guangmu Tianwang, he is depicted as having red skin gripping a red lasso in one hand and a red naga in another. The Naga, which are a race of half-human, half-serpent beings, are led by the guardian deity Guangmu, which help him snare humans with the lasso into the Buddhist faith. Somewhat of a strange way to spread their religion, but if it works, it works. With the fact that he is so well known, there really isn't much to speculate on. He is the deity that records the sins of man and promotes those faithful to the Buddha's teachings. Beautiful in its simplicity. Despite him often lacking a weapon, he is still portrayed standing atop a demon in his sculptures, here called a jaki, alongside his other guardians. Make no mistake, even without a weapon, you can never underestimate a heavenly king. In Shin Megami Tensei, Komokuten is portrayed in his Japanese depiction, with blue skin and holding a brush and parchment. Probably a good call, since the nagas and lasso would be a bit of a blindside for the more passive guardian. His design is most likely based on the painted clay statue dating back to the 8th century at Todaiji Temple in Nara. The four heavenly kings are ubiquitous throughout most of Asia. The differences between the deities vary anywhere from looking completely different to basically being the same. For example, the pipa instrument that Jikokuten has is an often omitted part of his statues in Japan, and more common in China. And Komokuten is almost completely different in his depictions and domain between China and Japan, with his sovereignty over the Naga race and less than consensual way he gets people to adhere to the Buddhist teachings. The four are often displayed adhering to their cardinal directions, with a central figure in the middle. In mythology, this being is called Taishakuten, or in Sanskrit known as the god Indra, king of the Devas. Sharing the name with a god of Hinduism, there he is a god of weather, the sky, and war, as well as king of all Devas. When incorporated into Buddhism, however, he is known as the Lord of the Center. Said to live in the Palace of the Correct Views at Heaven's Peak, he governs the other 32 gods and is attended to personally by the aforementioned 4 heavenly kings. In Japan, he is known as the god of wealth, though not necessarily material wealth, as with the other deities of Buddhism, they valued spiritual and inner wealth above all worldly desires. Taishakuten defends humans and even the other gods from all manner of evil with the power to revive those who fall in battle, and it's said in his home he let no suffering or sorrow come to pass. Interestingly, in Japanese artwork, Taishakuten is depicted riding an elephant, much like his depictions of Indra in Hinduism, and even sharing the unique trait of the elephant having 33 heads, symbolizing the other 33 gods of the heavenly realm he governs. With elements of a sun god and a creator god, he is as close to a supreme being in Buddhism as you could possibly get. Sadly, Taishakuten is not depicted in Shin Megami Tensei, but his Chinese variant is. This requires more explanation though. In Chinese myth, alongside the 4 heavenly kings, they also have the 4 sacred beasts that serve much the same purpose. Each 4 of these beasts represents a different season, direction, time of day, and type of karma. The Azure Dragon of the East, representing spring, dawn, the color blue, and young yang. The Vermilion Bird of the South, representing summer, midday, the color red, and old yang. The White Tiger of the West, representing autumn, dusk, the color white, and young yin. And finally, the Black Tortoise of the North, representing winter, midnight, the color black, and old yin. The yin and yang of these 4 beasts, along with the symbolism of their different times of day, represents the Taijitu symbols of inseparable contradictory opposites in all things. The famous yin-yang symbol personified beautifully in the beasts of the land. These 4 legendary animals hold many similarities with the 4 heavenly kings. In addition to them guarding the 4 cardinal directions, they even have a central figure, which in this case is actually portrayed in Shin Megami Tensei. The yellow dragon, Koryu, or Huanglong, is the central deity of the sacred beasts, representing the center, midsummer, the color yellow, and the element of earth, along with the entirety of the Taijitu symbol. Diving into the full meaning of these beasts is a tall order and requires another full video, though their importance to the 4 heavenly kings could not be ignored, so I thought I'd add a little bit about them. Byakko, Genbu, Suzaku, and Seiryu, along with their leader Koryu, are all depicted beautifully in Shin Megami Tensei, accompanying their Japanese humanoid compatriots. Well, that wraps up this globe-trotting demon deep dive. Let me know which ones were your favorite in the comments down below, and while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd have to say diving deep into the Islamic demons was a real treat. Despite Islam and Christianity both being Abrahamic religions, there's still so much to learn and appreciate from the other culture. Special thanks to ZZZ, Andre Vinicius da Silva Valens, Arctic Mirror, Kalos, Kerhos, Goose Kebab, Jem Morales, Just a Middleman, Masker2196, Matt M, Not Catchy, Patty123, Paul Torrio, The Digital Dutchman, VideoGamer75, and many more for supporting the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to support, check the link in the description below. Thanks for watching this worldwide demon compilation video, and I'll see you in the next Tony for You. Have a good one.